September 3rd, 1939, 11:15 a.m. Grimsby Docks, Lincolnshire, England. The smell is the first thing that hits you. A pungent, heavy mix of diesel fuel, wet rope, rotting fish heads, and the sharp brine of the North Sea. The docks at Grimsby are a chaotic forest of wooden masts and rusted steel funnels. This is the heart of Britain's deep-sea fishing industry, a place of hard labor and harder men. But today, the usual shouting of the fishmongers is silenced. The men standing on the grease-stained wooden decks are gathered around crackling, static-filled wireless radios. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's voice wavers through the speakers, solemn and heavy. Consequently, this country is at war with Germany. Standing on the deck of his 150-ton commercial trawler, Skipper Thomas Lang looks out at the gray, choppy water. He is 50 years old, his face weathered to the texture of old leather by 3 decades of North Atlantic gales. He knows the sea better than he knows his own wife. And he knows, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that the ocean he relies on for his livelihood is about to become the deadliest battlefield on Earth. Less than 10 hours later, his fears are validated. 250 miles northwest of Ireland, the German submarine U-30 fires a torpedo into the British passenger liner SS Athenia. 112 people die. The Battle of the Atlantic has begun. In the wood-paneled war rooms of the Admiralty in London, the panic is carefully concealed, but absolute. The First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, looks at the strategic maps, and the mathematics of the situation spell imminent doom. Britain is an island. It imports 55 million tons of food and raw materials every year. To keep the nation from starving, thousands of merchant ships must constantly cross the Atlantic in slow, lumbering convoys. To protect them, the Royal Navy needs escort ships, fast, heavily armed destroyers, capable of hunting down Admiral Karl Dönitz's terrifying new weapon, the Unterseeboot, or U-boat. But the Royal Navy simply does not have enough of them. The fleet is spread too thin, guarding the empire from the Mediterranean to the Far East. The Atlantic convoys are virtually naked. If the U-boats are allowed to roam free, they will sever Britain's economic jugular in a matter of months. The nation will freeze, starve, and eventually surrender. The Admiralty needs hundreds of anti-submarine vessels, and they need them yesterday. They cannot wait for shipyards to build them. They must find them. Churchill's gaze shifts from the gleaming battleships on the map to the coastal ports: Grimsby, Hull, Fleetwood, Aberdeen. Take the fishing fleet, the order comes down. Within days of the declaration of war, naval officers in crisp, brass-buttoned uniforms descend upon the grimy, fish-slicked docks of Britain. They are there to enact a massive, unprecedented requisitioning of civilian property and manpower. The creation of the Royal Naval Patrol Service, RNPS, goes into overdrive. To the polished officers of the regular Navy, the fishing fleet looks like a joke. The boats are small, usually between 100 and 150 feet long. They are painfully slow, maxing out at perhaps 10 or 11 knots. They are filthy, reeking of cod and haddock, their decks scarred by heavy trawling nets and icy storms. But the Admiralty isn't looking at the paint jobs, they are looking at the hulls. Deep-sea trawlers are built with one purpose in mind: surviving the worst weather the North Atlantic can throw at them while towing thousands of pounds of fish. They have deep drafts, thick steel plates, and low centers of gravity. They are incredibly seaworthy, and more importantly, the men who sail them are completely fearless in the face of the ocean. When the naval officers hand Skipper Lang his requisition papers, they aren't just taking his boat. They are taking him. The fishermen are given a choice that isn't really a choice: join the Royal Naval Patrol Service or be drafted into the regular infantry. For men who have salt water in their veins, the army is unthinkable. They sign the papers. Overnight, thousands of civilian fishermen, deckhands, engineers, cooks, and skippers are handed blue uniforms they barely know how to wear. They are an unruly bunch. They mock the concept of saluting. They refer to naval officers as "sir" only when strictly forced to, and usually with a thick layer of regional sarcasm. They wear thick woolen fishermen's sweaters instead of regulation tunics. The regular Navy views them with deep suspicion, nicknaming them Harry Tate's Navy, after a clumsy, bumbling music hall comedian of the era. But Admiral Dönitz's U-boat captains are not laughing. Beneath the waves, the German Type 7 U-boat is a masterpiece of predatory engineering. It is armed with acoustic torpedoes, an 88mm deck gun, and a crew highly trained in the art of the ambush. In the early days of 1940, during a period the Germans gleefully call the happy time, the U-boats slaughter merchant shipping. They attack on the surface at night, slipping between the columns of helpless cargo ships, firing torpedoes and disappearing before the regular Navy destroyers can even react. The British merchant sailors are dying in the freezing black water by the thousands. Back in the shipyards, Skipper Lang watches as his beloved trawler is violently transformed. The massive winches, used for hauling fishing nets, are ripped out with blowtorches. The fish holds, which once carried tons of iced cod, are gutted and reinforced to carry highly explosive munitions. This little civilian boat, designed to feed a nation, is being aggressively re-engineered to kill. And the men who once hunted the ocean for fish are about to be sent into the black pit of the Atlantic to hunt the deadliest predators on Earth. The fishermen are ready, but the transformation of their vessels is a brutal, makeshift process that will test the very limits of maritime engineering. October 14th, 1939, 7:30 hours, Lowestoft Shipyards, Suffolk. The screech of tearing metal and the blinding blue sparks of acetylene torches cut through the freezing morning fog. Skipper Thomas Lang stands on the damp cobblestones of the dry dock, a mug of black tea warming his calloused hands. He is watching his ship, his livelihood, being systematically mutilated. She has been stripped of her name, replaced by a drab designation, His Majesty's Trawler, HMT Rosalind. The bright, proud colors of her civilian paint job have been blasted away, smothered under a coat of depressing, utilitarian gray. To convert a fishing trawler into a warship is not an elegant process. It is an exercise in brute force. A heavy dockside crane swings overhead, groaning under the weight of a rusted iron monstrosity. It is a 12-pounder deck gun, salvaged from the mothballed fleet of the First World War. The crane lowers the weapon onto the trawler's forecastle. Lang winces. The deck of a trawler is built to hold men and nets, not artillery. To prevent the massive recoil of the gun from punching straight through the wooden deck boards, shipwrights are frantically bolting thick steel girders beneath the firing platform. But the 12-pounder is mostly for show, meant to keep surfaced U-boats at a distance. The real killing power is being attached to the stern, where the massive, greased winches used to spool miles of heavy fishing net. Iron rails are being welded directly to the deck. These are the depth charge racks. Men in overalls are already loading them with what look like oversized ash cans, cylinders packed with 300 pounds of Amatol high explosive. If dropped at the right depth, the hydrostatic fuse will detonate the charge, creating a shockwave capable of cracking a U-boat's pressure hull like an eggshell. But dropping a depth charge is useless if you don't know where the submarine is, and that requires the Royal Navy's most closely guarded secret. Lang walks down into the dry dock, beneath the hull of his ship. A young naval engineer is supervising the installation of a strange, canvas-covered dome projecting downward from the keel. A.S. Dick, skipper, the engineer says, patting the cold iron. Anti-Submarine Detection Investigation Committee. It sends a sound wave through the water. If it hits a steel hull, the sound bounces back, gives you a range and a bearing. It is cutting-edge technology, and the Admiralty is terrified of it falling into enemy hands. Because of this, they refuse to let civilian fishermen operate it. Enter Sub-Lieutenant David Miller. Miller walks down the gangway later that afternoon, clutching his duffel bag. He is 19 years old. His Royal Navy uniform is crisp, his brass buttons are polished to a mirror shine, and his hands are as soft as a bank clerk's. He has spent the last 3 months in a top-secret classroom learning the acoustic signatures of German diesels. He has never been to sea in a storm. As Miller steps onto the deck of the HMT Rosalind, he stops dead. The crew is staring at him. There are 12 trawlermen. They are wearing thick, oil-stained roll-neck frocks, heavy sea boots, and woolen beanies. Most of them are missing a finger or two from winch accidents. Their arms are covered in faded blue ink tattoos. They look like pirates. "Permission to come aboard, Skipper?" Miller asks, his voice cracking slightly. He snaps a crisp salute. Lang doesn't return the salute. He just nods. "Stow your gear in the aft cabin, lad, and mind the grease." The culture clash between the Royal Navy and the trawlermen is immediate and abrasive. A few days later, a regular Navy commander boards the ship for a final inspection. He expects to see a disciplined crew standing at attention. Instead, he finds the cook smoking a pipe on a depth charge and the chief engineer wearing a civilian flat cap. And the hut. The commander's face turns an alarming shade of purple. He begins shouting about King's regulations, mutiny, and the proper way to address an officer. He demands that the crew be issued standard naval uniforms and taught to march. Skipper Lang steps forward. He is shorter than the commander, but his presence is immovable. "With respect, sir," Lang says, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "If we stop to salute every time a wave hits the deck, we'll drown. These men know the sea. They know how to keep this boat upright in a force 10 gale while pulling 10 tons of dead weight. You want us to hunt submarines? We will hunt submarines, but we will do it our way." The commander glares at Lang, ready to throw him in the brig. But the Admiralty's orders are clear. The Navy desperately needs these men. They cannot afford a strike. A compromise is struck. The fishermen will wear a variation of the uniform, but strict naval discipline is quietly ignored. To distinguish them from the regular fleet, the men of the Royal Naval Patrol Service are issued a unique silver badge to wear on their sleeves. A shark pierced by a marlin spike. It is a mark of pride. They aren't Navy men. They are trawler men fighting a war. November 2nd, 1939. 1600 hours. The Western approaches. The conversion is complete. HMT Rosalind chugs out of the estuary, her ancient triple expansion steam engine thumping a steady rhythm. The coastline of England fades into the gray mist behind them. The sea immediately shows its teeth. The North Atlantic swell lifts the 150-ton trawler and drops her into the troughs with bone-jarring violence. Sub-Lieutenant Miller, the young Aztec operator, is instantly, violently seasick. He clings to a bucket in his cramped, windowless acoustic cabin, the smell of diesel fumes making his stomach turn inside out. "Get up, lad," Lang says, stepping into the cabin, balancing perfectly on the pitching deck without holding on to anything. He hands Miller a dry biscuit. "Eat this. Keep your eyes on the dial. If you hear a ping, you forget your stomach." Ahead of them, scattered across the churning gray ocean, is convoy HX-9. 30 heavily laden merchant ships, rust-streaked and vulnerable, carrying wheat, steel, and fuel from North America. They are moving at a painful 8 knots. To the port and starboard of the convoy, the escorts take up their positions. There are only 4 of them. 1 regular Navy destroyer and 3 converted trawlers, including the Rosalind. They are sheepdogs guarding a massive flock against a pack of unseen wolves. As the sun sets, the ocean turns the color of bruised iron. The temperature plummets. Ice begins to form on the rigging. The men on the open bridge pull their collars up, peering into the gloom. They are entering the Black Pit, the mid-Atlantic gap where Allied land-based aircraft cannot reach them. Here, the U-boats own the night. Down in his cramped cabin, Miller puts on his heavy Bakelite headphones. He throws a switch. Ping. The sound wave shoots out from the dome beneath the hull, traveling through the freezing water. Miller listens to the return echo. Nothing but the rushing of the ocean. Ping. The trawlermen on deck stand by the depth charges, their hands freezing to the iron rails. They are no longer hunting the silver darlings of the North Sea. They are the hunted and the hunters. The war of attrition has begun, and the fate of Britain rests on the shoulders of men who smell of fish and cordite. November 5th, 1939. 2340 hours. The Mid-Atlantic Gap. There is no darkness quite like the North Atlantic in winter. It is absolute, suffocating, and terrifying. To show a single light, even the brief flare of a match to light a cigarette, is a court-martial offense. A German U-boat commander looking through a pair of Carl Zeiss binoculars can spot a lit match from over a mile away. For 3 days, convoy HX-9 has been crawling eastward at a grueling 8 knots. The weather has deteriorated into a force 8 gale. The sea is a mountainous landscape of rolling black water, lifting the 30 merchant ships high into the freezing air before dropping them into deep, churning troughs. On the open bridge of HMT Rosalind, Skipper Thomas Lang's beard is frozen solid. Rime ice coats the ship's rigging, thickening the cables until they look like white pythons. The ice is heavy, and if too much accumulates on the upper decks, the little trawler will become top-heavy and capsize. Every few hours, Lang sends 2 fishermen out onto the treacherous, pitching deck with wooden mallets to smash the ice away. It is grueling, lethal work. 1 slip, and a man is swallowed by the Black Pit. There is no turning back to save a man overboard. To stop a ship in a U-boat zone is suicide. This is the psychological reality of the Battle of the Atlantic. It is 99% sheer, agonizing boredom and physical misery, punctuated by 1% of absolute terror. Down in the cramped, windowless Aztec cabinet, Sub-Lieutenant David Miller is fighting his own battle. The stench in the tiny room is overpowering, a mix of stale sweat, ozone from the electrical equipment, and Miller's own vomit sloshing in a bucket by his boots. But his hands are steady on the dials, and his ears are strained to the breaking point. Hunting a submarine in 1939 is not like looking at a modern radar screen. It is an acoustic art form. Miller wears heavy Bakelite headphones, listening to the ocean. Every 3 seconds, the Aztec transmitter beneath the hull sends out a pulse of high-frequency sound. Ping. Then, Miller listens to the return. The ocean is deafeningly noisy. Through the headphones, Miller hears the groaning of the Rosalind's wooden hull, the crashing of the waves, the biological clicks of shrimp, the haunting calls of whales, and the chaotic, thrashing thrum of 30 merchant ship propellers churning the water a mile away. He is looking for a ghost in a hurricane. He has to mentally filter out all the background noise and wait for the specific, sharp, metallic clack of a sound wave hitting the steel pressure hull of a submerged German Type 7 U-boat. Ping, swish, just the sea. What the Admiralty didn't fully explain to Miller in the classroom was how the environment weaponizes itself against the technology. As the water temperature changes, it creates thermoclines, invisible layers of cold and warm water that bend and distort the Aztec sound waves. A U-boat can dive beneath a cold layer, and the ping will simply bounce off the temperature gradient, rendering the submarine entirely invisible. Furthermore, the U-boats have developed a terrifying counter-tactic. Admiral Dönitz knows that Aztec only works on submerged targets. So, he orders his captains to attack on the surface at night. On the surface, a U-boat's low silhouette is nearly impossible to spot in the swells. On the surface, it can use its powerful diesel engines to run at 17 knots, 7 knots faster than the Rosalind. It can outrun the escorts, slip between the columns of merchant ships, fire its torpedoes, and vanish into the dark before the depth charges can even be primed. 23:55 hours. Lang grips the wooden wheelhouse railing. The cold is seeping into his bones. Suddenly, the deck beneath his boots vibrates violently. A split second later, a deep, concussive crump rolls across the water. It is a sound felt in the chest before it is heard by the ears. 2 miles off the Rosalind's starboard bow, the night is torn open by a blinding pillar of orange fire. "Torpedo!" the lookout screams. The SS Empire Horizon, a merchant tanker carrying thousands of tons of aviation fuel, has been hit. The explosion is catastrophic. Burning fuel rains down across the ocean surface, creating a horrific, floating bonfire that illuminates the towering black waves. The convoy protocol immediately kicks in. Panic. The merchant ships blast their steam whistles, a deafening, mournful wail echoing across the Atlantic. They begin to zigzag, breaking formation in a desperate attempt to throw off the invisible sniper's aim. "Action stations!" Lang roars, slamming the engine telegraph to full ahead. "Hard a starboard! Get those men on the stern!" The fishermen of the Rosalind don't hesitate. They scramble over the icy, pitching deck, grabbing the heavy iron release levers of the depth charge racks. They are no longer tired. The adrenaline of the hunt has taken over. A mile away, the regular Navy destroyer fires a star shell high into the sky. It bursts with a brilliant, magnesium-white glare, casting stark, shifting shadows over the chaotic sea. In that fleeting seconds of artificial daylight, Lang sees it. Just a mile away, a low, gray conning tower is cutting through the waves, water streaming from its casing. It is the U-boat. It had attacked on the surface, but the sudden illumination from the star shell has spooked the commander. "He's crash diving!" Lang shouts. The U-boat's bow pitches down, its twin bronze propellers chewing the air for a fraction of a second before it slips beneath the black water, leaving only a swirling circle of white foam. By diving, the U-boat has blinded itself. But it has also just entered David Miller's world. Down in the stinking Aztec shack, Miller is thrown against the bulkhead as the trawler heels hard to starboard. He scrambles back to his seat, jamming the headphones over his ears. He rapidly turns the bearing dial, sweeping the underwater acoustic beam toward the U-boat's last known position. Come on, Miller whispers, sweat-cutting tracks through the grime on his face. Ping, swish, nothing. The U-boat is slipping away into the deep. Miller adjusts the bearing. 5 degrees starboard. Ping. A second passes. Then it comes. It cuts through the static, the wave noise, and the hum of the engines. It is hard, sharp, and unmistakable. Clack! Miller's heart hammers against his ribs. It is the echo. He has them. He hits the voice pipe to the bridge. Contact, bearing 040, range 800 yards. Up on the bridge, Lang feels a predatory thrill he hasn't felt since he hunted the massive, elusive shoals of herring off the Dogger Bank. But this prey shoots back. Steer 040, Lang barks at the helmsman. Stand by depth charges. Set fuses for 150 feet. The little wooden fishing boat, armed with First World War cast-offs and a crew of foul-mouthed civilians, turns its blunt nose directly toward the apex predator of the German Kriegsmarine. The distance closes. 700 yards, 600. The cat and mouse game is over. The brawl is about to begin. November 6th, 1939, 00:05 hours, the Mid-Atlantic Gap. Range 400 yards, bearing 035. Sub-Lieutenant Miller's voice cracks over the brass voice pipe. Down in the cramped, reeking Aztec cabinet, the pinging has changed rhythm. It is faster now, more urgent. The clack of the return echo is painfully loud in Miller's headphones, ringing against his eardrums. Up on the open, ice-slicked bridge, Skipper Thomas Lang grips the wheelhouse telegraph. The HMT Rosalind is vibrating violently, her ancient triple-expansion steam engine pushed well past its red line, churning out a agonizingly slow 10.5 knots. The wind howls through the frozen rigging, but the men on deck are sweating. 300 yards. He's altering course to starboard, Skipper. He hears us coming. Beneath the heaving black waves, the commander of the German Type 7 U-boat is not a fool. He knows he has been spotted. He is ordering his plainsmen to dive hard and turn sharply, attempting to slip outside the narrow acoustic beam of the trawler's astick. The U-boat is a masterpiece of precision engineering, a sleek steel predator capable of diving to 600 feet. The Rosalind is a wooden bathtub built to haul cod. By all laws of modern naval warfare, this should not be a contest. 200 yards, Miller screams into the pipe. 150, lost contact. Skipper, I've lost him. Lang doesn't flinch. This is the fatal flaw of 1930s Aztec technology, the terrifying phenomenon known as the blind cone. Because the acoustic beam projects downward at an angle from the trawler's hull, the sound waves pass straight over the top of the submarine once the hunting ship gets too close. For the final, crucial 150 yards of the attack run, the hunter is entirely blind. The Royal Navy manuals dictate complex mathematical formulas to calculate the U-boat's projected speed and turn radius during this blackout period. But Thomas Lang isn't a mathematician. He is a fisherman. He has spent 30 years predicting the unseen movements of massive shoals of herring in the dark currents of the North Sea. He closes his eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the rhythm of the ocean beneath his boots, visualizing the invisible steel shark turning beneath him. Port 15, Lang growls to the helmsman, his voice a low rumble over the storm. Hold her steady. Stand by depth charges. On the stern, the trawlermen are clinging to the icy iron rails. The sea is washing over the deck, freezing instantly. They are holding heavy wooden mallets, standing beside the release levers of the depth charge racks. Stand by, Lang roars. He counts the seconds in his head. 1, 2, 3. If he drops too early, the U-boat escapes. If he drops too late, the submarine slips away. 4, 5, 6. Fire 1. A fisherman slams his mallet onto the release lever. With a heavy metal clank, the first 300-pound cylinder of Amatol rolls off the stern rails and plummets into the churning white wake of the trawler. Fire 2. Port and starboard throwers, fire! 2 more barrels roll off the stern, while crude mechanical mortars on the sides of the ship launch depth charges outward, creating a diamond-shaped pattern designed to trap the submarine in a cage of high explosives. Full ahead, Lang screams. Brace for shock. The trawler's propeller thrashes the water as she desperately tries to clear the blast radius. Deep below, the hydrostatic fuses on the depth charges sense the crushing pressure of the ocean. At exactly 150 feet, the detonators ignite. Water, unlike air, is completely incompressible. When 1,200 pounds of high explosive detonate simultaneously in the deep ocean, the energy has nowhere to go but outward, traveling at 5,000 feet per second. The shockwave hits the Rosalind like an earthquake. The 150-ton wooden trawler is physically lifted out of the water. The deck heaves violently upward, throwing men to their knees. Every light bulb on the ship shatters instantly, plunging the bridge into total darkness. Down in the engine room, the chief engineer is thrown against a bulkhead as steam pipes scream and rupture. In the aft cabin, Sub-Lieutenant Miller's headphones emit a screech so loud it leaves his ears bleeding. Behind the trawler, the ocean erupts. 4 towering geysers of boiling white water and foam shoot 100 feet into the night sky, illuminated by the distant, burning wreck of the tanker. Silence crashes down on the ship, save for the howling wind and the hissing of broken steam pipes. "Did we get the bastard?" the cook yells, picking himself up from the icy deck, his hands bleeding. Lang wipes a mixture of freezing sea spray and sweat from his eyes. He stares into the roiling foam of the depth charge boils, nothing but black water. Then, the ocean tears open. Less than 200 yards off the trawler's port beam, a massive, gray, dripping shape breaks the surface. It is the U-boat. The depth charges hadn't scored a direct hit, but the immense pressure wave had buckled the submarine's pressure hull, ruptured its high-pressure air lines, and jammed its diving planes. Mortally wounded and flooding rapidly, the German commander had no choice but to blow his emergency ballast and broach the surface. For a split second, the 2 vessels drift parallel to each other in the trough of a massive wave, the peak of German naval engineering and a battered Grimsby fishing boat. Then, the U-boat's conning tower hatch kicks open. Elite German submariners, clad in leather jackets, pour out onto the slick, narrow deck. They are not surrendering. They are running straight for the formidable 88mm deck gun mounted on the submarine's foredeck and the deadly 20mm anti-aircraft flak gun on the Wintergarten behind the bridge. "Gunners!" Lang bellows, his voice shattering the shock of the moment. "Man the 12-pounder! Give them hell!" The culture clash of the Royal Naval Patrol Service vanishes in the cordite smoke. The trawlermen do not act like disciplined sailors. They act like cornered dock workers in a Grimsby pub brawl. 2 fishermen carrying heavy pans of ammunition slide across the icy deck. The gun captain, a massive man missing his left thumb from a winch accident, slams a shell into the breech of the antiquated First World War 12-pounder deck gun. "Sights are frozen!" the gunner screams. "Then aim down the bloody barrel!" Lang roars back. Boom! The 12-pounder fires. The shipwright's reinforced girders hold, but the recoil is so violent it shudders the entire trawler. The shell screams across the 200-yard gap, missing the U-boat's conning tower by inches and detonating harmlessly in the sea beyond. The Germans return fire. The 20mm flak gun on the submarine opens up, a terrifying stream of green tracer fire ripping through the dark. The heavy caliber bullets tear through the wooden wheelhouse of the Rosalind like paper. Splinters of wood and shattered glass explode outward. A deckhand screams and goes down, clutching his thigh. The German 88mm gun crew wrestles their massive weapon toward the trawler. If that gun fires, the Rosalind will be blown to atoms. "Keep firing!" Lang yells, grabbing a Lewis machine gun mounted on the bridge rail and squeezing the trigger, hosing the U-boat's deck with .303 caliber bullets. The fishermen reload the 12-pounder in 3 seconds flat. The U-boat is rising on the crest of a wave, exposing its vulnerable waterline. "Fire!" The deck gun roars again. This time, the aim is true. The 12-pounder high-explosive shell slams directly into the base of the U-boat's conning tower. The detonation is spectacular. A flash of blinding yellow light illuminates the panicked faces of the German sailors. The blast rips the 20mm flak gun entirely off its mount, hurling men into the freezing, churning ocean. Shrapnel shreds the pressure hull. The U-boat shudders violently, smoke pouring from its shattered tower. The 88mm gun crew, realizing the sub is sinking beneath their feet, abandons their weapon and leaps into the water. The submarine's bow pitches upward at a sickening 45-degree angle. With a horrific screech of tearing metal and escaping air, the mechanical predator slides backward, sinking into the ink-black depths of the Atlantic. On the deck of the HMT Rosalind, the smell of cordite and ozone mixes with the familiar scent of fish and diesel. The fishermen lean against the freezing rails, their chests heaving, their ears ringing, staring at the swirling vortex where the U-boat used to be. They are civilians. They are ill-disciplined, foul-mouthed, and under-equipped. But tonight, they have bled the wolves. November 6th, 1939, 0:15 hours, the Mid-Atlantic Gap. The silence that follows the sinking of a U-boat is not peaceful. It is the heavy, suffocating silence of a graveyard. On the shattered, splintered deck of HMT Rosalind, the ringing in Skipper Thomas Lang's ears slowly fades, replaced by the relentless howling of the Force 8 gale and the chaotic hissing of escaping steam from below decks. 200 yards away, the oily black water is littered with debris. The harsh magnesium glare of a distant star shell reflects off the thick slick of diesel fuel pooling on the surface. And in the center of that slick, bobbing in the freezing mountainous swells, are the survivors. German submariners, the elite gray wolves of the Kriegsmarine, are choking on fuel and salt water, screaming for help in the dark. Lang leans heavily against the ruined framework of the wheelhouse. His hands, gripping the wooden rail, are numb and bleeding. He looks at the men struggling in the water. For a moment, the ingrained hatred of war wrestles with the fundamental law of the sea. You do not let a sailor drown. "Get the scramble nets over the port side," Lang barks, his voice hoarse from shouting over the gunfire. "Throw them some lines. Move." The trawlermen, their faces blackened with cordite smoke and sweat, don't hesitate. They grab heavy hemp ropes and heave them into the freezing Atlantic. They lean over the icy gunnels, reaching down into the treacherous swells to haul the soaking, shivering German sailors aboard. Down in the cramped acoustic cabin, Sub-Lieutenant David Miller peels the heavy Bakelite headphones off his ears. He is trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical blow. He looks at the Aztec dials. They are silent. He stumbles up the ladder to the open deck, gasping at the freezing air. He watches as a massive Grimsby fisherman, the same man who fired the fatal 12-pounder shell, heaves a terrified 19-year-old German mechanic onto the bloody deck of the trawler. The battle is over, but the war has barely begun. The sinking of one U-boat by a converted fishing vessel is a tactical miracle, but it is a strategic drop in the ocean. Admiral Karl Dönitz is building submarines faster than the Allies can sink them. Over the next 4 years, the Battle of the Atlantic escalates into the longest, largest, and most complex naval campaign in human history. And through it all, the men of Harry Tate's Navy remain on the front lines. The Admiralty realizes quickly that the requisitioning of the fishing fleet cannot be a temporary stopgap. The regular Navy's sleek destroyers and newly built corvettes are vital, but there are simply never enough of them to escort the thousands of merchant convoys crisscrossing the ocean. The humble trawlers, drifters, and whalers become the indispensable, rusted backbone of the escort groups. By 1942, the Royal Naval Patrol Service swells to an astonishing size. Over 70,000 men and 6,000 small vessels are brought under the RNPS banner, headquartered at HMS Europa in the seaside town of Lowestoft. They are dispatched everywhere. They hunt submarines off the coast of Iceland. They sweep for acoustic mines in the freezing, fog-choked English Channel. They escort vital supply convoys through the blistering heat of the Mediterranean and the ice flows of the Arctic route to Russia. But it is the Atlantic where the meat grinder turns the fastest. Year after year, the HMT Rosalind and her sister ships endure a living hell. The fishermen are pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance. They sail through hurricanes that roll their little wooden ships onto their beam ends, threatening to capsize them in the black, freezing troughs. They endure weeks of sleep deprivation, living on hardtack and black tea, constantly scanning the horizon for the telltale feather of a periscope wake. The culture clash between the regular Navy and the fishermen slowly evaporates, replaced by a profound, battle-forged mutual respect. Young, clean-cut officers like Sub-Lieutenant Miller grow beards, don thick, oil-stained fishermen's frocks, and learn to navigate by the seat of their pants. They realize that the silver badge of the RNPS, the shark pierced by a marlin spike, is not a mark of an amateur, but the emblem of a survivor. But survival comes at a horrific cost. The trawlers are slow, they are lightly armed. When Dönitz introduces the Wolfpack tactic, coordinating dozens of U-boats to swarm a convoy at night, the escorts are overwhelmed. The ocean floor from Liverpool to Halifax becomes a graveyard of jagged steel and shattered wood. If a trawler takes a torpedo, it does not sink slowly. Packed with high explosives, depth charges, and ammunition, a hit often results in a catastrophic magazine detonation. The ship simply ceases to exist in a flash of blinding white light, leaving nothing behind but a smear of oil and a few splintered deckboards. May 8th, 1945, 1500 hours, Grimsby Docks. 5.5 years after she was brutally torn from her civilian life, the HMT Rosalind limps back into the Humber estuary. The war in Europe is over. Germany has surrendered. Thomas Lang stands on the bridge. His dark hair is now entirely white. His face is deeply lined, carrying the invisible weight of the convoys, the storms, and the men. He has watched burn in the Black Pit. Beside him stands David Miller, no longer a green, seasick teenager, but a hardened naval officer whose chest is adorned with ribbons. The docks at Grimsby are crowded with cheering people, waving Union Jacks. But as the Rosalind bumps against the wooden pilings, the mood among the crew is not jubilant. It is a quiet, exhausted relief. The statistics of their service are staggering. Over the course of the war, the Royal Naval Patrol Service lost approximately 260 trawlers and small vessels to torpedoes, mines, and the merciless weather of the North Atlantic. Nearly 2,400 men of the RNPS, the rough, foul-mouthed fishermen from the coastal towns of Britain, were killed in action. Most of them have no grave but the sea. Within weeks, the shipwrights descend on the Rosalind again. This time, the blowtorches cut away the weapons of war. The rusted 12-pounder deck gun is lifted off the forecastle by a crane. The depth charge racks are unbolted and hauled away. The heavy, greasy winches are reinstalled on the aft deck. The drab, depressing gray paint is scraped off, and the bright civilian colors of the deep-sea fishing fleet are slowly restored. The fishermen hand back their uniforms. They take off their silver badges. They go back to being civilians. A month later, Skipper Lang steers his ship out of the estuary, heading north toward the Dogger Bank. The smell of cordite and ozone is finally fading from the wood, replaced once again by the sharp, pungent tang of brine and fish. The Rosalind casts her heavy nets into the dark water, resuming the ancient, grueling work she was built for. But as Lang grips the wooden wheel, looking out over the churning gray expanse of the North Sea, he knows that nothing will ever truly be the same. The ocean is no longer just a workplace. It is a massive, silent tomb. History books will dedicate endless pages to the sleek, fast destroyers of the Royal Navy, the code breakers of Bletchley Park, and the massive battleships that dueled in the Pacific. But the true saviors of Britain during its darkest hour were the men in the stained woolen sweaters. When the nation was starving and the U-boats were tightening the noose, it was the civilian fishing fleet that stepped into the breach. They took their little, foul-smelling wooden boats into the jaws of the most advanced underwater killing machines the world had ever seen, and they held the line. They were the unsung armada, and without them, the Battle of the Atlantic and the Second World War would have been lost.